Move over Italia 90 because Italia 68 is in town. Format changes, modernising tactical innovation, qualifying match riots, a semi-final decided on a coin toss, and an unconventional final all featured in a memorable celebration of football. Without further ado, let's get into the 1968 European Championships. With the third ever tournament came a new name. The old moniker of the European Nations Cup was dropped, and the tournament adopted the more recognisable European Championship name that the tournament still retains to this very day. It was all changed in the lead up to the tournament proper as well. UEFA deemed the old system of a straight two-legged knockout until the final four advanced to the final tournament to be a little too impractical and uneven. So behold, the first instance of a group-based qualifying for the Euros. 8 groups were accordingly drawn. The 8 winners then advanced to a quarter-final stage with 2 legs, and the winner of those 4 ties would advance to the official tournament in June of 1968. West Germany decided to finally recognise the standing of the tournament and entered for the very first time. And for this tournament, every contemporary UEFA member nation opted to compete, apart from Iceland and Malta. A sorely missed presence, but truly probably the first tournament with every big name in attendance. So starting with Group 1, there was always going to be a high profile casualty here. Tournament holders Spain were drawn with a very prominent Czechoslovakia, along with Ireland and Turkey also featuring. Czechoslovakia immediately stamped their authority on the group in the early stages, taking 3 wins from a possible 3. Spain faltered with a 0-0 draw to Ireland, so at the halfway mark it was looking like the Eastern Europeans were poised to advance to the quarterfinals. Note here that the organisation of these qualifying fixtures was quite different to what we're used to now. It was very much about just playing the fixtures when you could. There were no sort of synchronised kickoffs, and games were not played in a strict order. This led to the odd situation at the end of the group of Czechoslovakia having 3 fixtures remaining, with all the other sides just having 1 fixture left. So everybody had to play Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia were waiting to play everybody. They needed just 2 points from their final 3 games, which amounted to either 2 draws or 1 win under the 2-1-0 point system at the time. So instead of getting 3 points for a win, you get 2 points for a win. Behold then a footballing bottle worthy of 1995-1996 Newcastle United. The first game was against Spain in Madrid. They fell to a 2-1 defeat here, despite an absolute stunner by Ladislav Kuna. Okay though, no panic yet. Spain were after all the second best team in the group. However, they now travelled away to Ankara to face an unfancied Turkey side. Remarkably, they were subject to a defensive masterclass and fell to a 0-0 draw. Still, one last game left at home in Prague to the Irish national team. All was going to plan as they took the lead 2/3 of the way into the game through an own goal. Ray Treacy levelled the score, but again it was fine, all they needed was the draw. But then, Turla O'Connor in the 86th minute stole a win for Ireland and stunned the opposition. Through went Spain to the next round. If that one happened in the modern day, Twitter would never ever hear the end of it. There were plenty of heavy hitters in Group 2. Portugal and Sweden had great international pedigree at the time, the former boasting legendary World Cup 1966 Eusebio in their ranks, and Sweden with a brilliant historical record. But to their dismay, it would be Bulgaria who marched to a very comfortable group victory, remaining completely unbeaten and keeping a clean sheet in all of their fixtures bar one, which was against rank outsiders Norway. And they were into the next round. Group 3 belonged to European Championship specialists, the Soviet Union, from start to finish. They prevailed with a 5-point advantage over their nearest rivals Greece and Austria. This included a 4-3 thriller between the latter and the Soviet Union in Moscow. Eduard Streltsov's late winner was required to separate the two teams. The final match of the group between Greece and Austria made the headlines for all the wrong reasons, in spite of being a complete dead rubber game. At 1-1 with just 5 minutes to go, the game showed absolutely no signs of spilling over. This was until Hungarian match referee Gyula Jair sent off Greek football legend Takis Lukandis of Panathinaikos. The Greek supporters duly went mental at this perceived injustice, and they flooded the pitch, with opportunistic Austrian supporters also taking the opportunity to cause some havoc. Players became involved in fistfights with fans of the opposite persuasion, and the referee was smashed in the head with a glass bottle by a Greek supporter. 200 policemen were deployed to restore order, and once the riot had been quelled, the match was unsurprisingly abandoned. Given the meaningless standing of the game, when it came to wider qualification, the game was not replayed and the result was just left void. Group 4 of qualifying was a curious affair. It was the only pool featuring just 3 teams. The favoured West Germany and Yugoslavia were drawn with Albania, who were poised to be the group's whipping boys. Albania got smashed in their first 3 games, failing to score and conceding 12. Yugoslavia and West Germany tallied up a win apiece against one another. The final game was to be West Germany facing off against Albania in Tirana. A West Germany win would see them qualify, despite notching up the same amount of points as Yugoslavia, due to their superior goal difference. It seemed like an easy win for the Germans, but a defensive masterclass from Albania managed to scrape a 0-0 draw despite falling victim to a 6-0 hammering in the reverse fixture. Yugoslavia advanced against the odds, with a big tournament favourite eliminated in their first appearance. Group 5 was another slug between heavy hitters, but it was to be Hungary who had the appetite for success. 1964 tournament semi-finalists Denmark had an absolutely torrid time, coming last with a -10 goal difference, including a 6-0 hammering at the hands of the Hungarians. Johan Cruyff featured on the international stage for the first time for the Netherlands, scoring on his debut in the opening fixture against Hungary, where they raced into a 2-0 lead, only to be pegged back for the draw. Just listen to the noise of the Dutch crowd as he sinks their second goal. This young Dutch team proved to be just a little bit too raw to seriously challenge for qualification, but they provided some thrill-a-minute football, and this Dutch young squad would soon be coming into their golden age. East Germany were the closest challengers to the formidable Hungarians, providing the leading side with their only defeat of the group, and also helping themselves to a thrilling 4-3 victory over the Netherlands. Group 6 was a cakewalk for the Italians, 5 wins, 1 draw and no losses on their way to success. Some of their greatest ever players were maturing during this period. Inter Milan legend and one club man, Sandro Mazzola, was sublime, as was the legendary Gigi Riva. Cyprus were probably the worst national team in Europe at the time, and they suffered heavily in the group, but remarkably, they managed to win their last game against Switzerland, taking a famous victory in Nicosia. Pronunciations again, I apologise. France were made to sweat a little bit throughout their Group 7 victory, with the Belgium national team a particular thorn in their side. Paul van Himpst's double led to a shock victory for the Belgians in Brussels, and France's campaign was on the verge of ruin, if not for a dramatic late leveller from Robert Herbin against the Belgians in Nantes. Luckily for the French side, they triumphed home and away against Luxembourg and Poland, whilst the Belgian side faltered against the Polish. France got away with a couple of sketchy losses, with Belgium coming in second and Poland third. No repeat of 1964's heroics from Luxembourg, only managing a sole point with a 0-0 draw against Poland in Luxembourg City. And then finally, we come to Group 8. This is another curious case. Here, UEFA made an allowance to the respective football associations of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to allow the British Home Nations Championship results of 1966 and 1967 to 1968 to count as the definitive qualification results for the European Championship. Scotland won the first edition of the tournament and England the second, but it was the latter who advanced due to a better record across both tournaments. The final game of the qualification process and 1967 to 1968 home championship was a showdown between England and Scotland, with the northern nation needing a win to advance to the Euros. An early England goal from Martin Peters was cancelled out by Yogi Hughes, but the Scots could not find an all-important winner in front of an utterly crazy 130,000 spectators at Hampden Park. England were through to the quarterfinal stage, and it was the only time that such a qualifying system was sanctioned to be used. That marked the end of the group qualifying stage. An unseeded draw was to be conducted for the quarterfinal round, boasting 4 ties with 2 legs each, and the winners would go through to the final tournament. Italy were chosen as the first choice to host the competition. Providing they won their tie. These quarterfinals boasted some awe-inspiring, ding-dong international football, so let's detail the thrills and spills of the Euro 1968 quarterfinals. The first big clash was when the Soviet Union were paired against Hungary. These were the footballing powerhouses of the time, favourites for the tournament proper, and 2 of the most convincing teams in the qualification process. The first leg was played in Budapest, and the Hungarians raced into an early lead. János Farkas popped up yet again to poke home at the near post. A moment to forget for Soviet keeper Kavashvili. The Soviet keeper had yet another nightmare moment with 5 minutes left on the clock as he came out and spilled an ineffectual cross. The rebound fell to János Goroks, who stroked home into an empty net. Advantage Hungary, a dream first leg for them as they carried a 2-goal advantage into the second leg in Moscow. But a visit to the Central Lenin Stadium was always going to be daunting, as 91,000 loyal supporters packed into the venue, hoping for a miracle to overcome the deficit. The USSR duly provided. The first goal was another head-in-hands moment, this time for the Hungarian defence. A cross from the right-hand side was smashed into the unsuspecting defender and straight into the back of the net for an own goal. A second came 14 minutes into the second half, as a Soviet cross unintentionally went straight into the net after being dummied by their centre-forward Banishevsky. The hammer blow came on 73 minutes, as there was a dribble through the heart of the Hungarian backline before a beautiful defence-splitting pass was made and then dispatched by Anatoly Byoshevs on the right-hand side. They had completed a wondrous comeback in front of their home support. The defeat would have been especially bitter for the Hungarians, with much ill sentiment still surrounding the suppression of the 1956 student protests from the Soviet military, and whilst the fixture did not quite carry the animosity of the infamous Olympic water polo match, which ended in a fist fight between the two, it was still a catastrophic result for the Hungarian nation. Bulgaria versus Italy was also poised to be an enthralling encounter. Bulgaria had overcome some challenging opposition on their way to their group victory, while Italy had proved utterly dominant in finishing off their rivals in Group 6. The first leg in Sofia fit the lofty bill. Bulgaria took the lead, Kotkov coolly finishing from the penalty spot after being wiped out by the Italian goalkeeper. There were no more goals until the 60th minute, when Dimitar Penev scored a hugely unfortunate own goal to bring things level, inadvertently tapping into his own net whilst challenging an Italian forward. Bulgaria responded strongly though. They scored a rebound after a goalmouth scramble, and Petar Zekov beat the Italian offside trap to poke home a third. The Italians pulled a goal back late on when Pierno Prati scored following an excellent cutback. 3-2 the final score, and finally poised heading back to the San Paolo Stadium in Naples for the second leg. It was a dream start to the home leg for the Italians. Pierino Prati the hero yet again, finishing with a spectacular diving header to bring the tie level on aggregate. Look at that header, leapt like a salmon. A very low salmon. In the 55th minute, the Italians struck again. A layoff from a free kick was hit with venom, smacking the inside of the post and going in past the helpless Bulgarian keeper. It was enough for Italy to close off the tie, and they would go through to the tournament proper as the hosts, with Bulgaria left wondering what could have been. In the third tie of the quarterfinals, it was a match-up between the World Cup winners England and the Euros winners of 1964 in Spain. At Wembley, a beautiful trick free kick routine was in display. Look at Bobby Charlton here, smacking home a last gasp winner following a layoff, dribbling past one Spanish defender in the process. At the Bernabeu, Spain levelled the tie early in the second half when 1964 star Amancio cut a shot home after picking up the ball from a blocked shot. England's set-piece mastery was enough to give them the upper hand though. Martin Peters nodded home at the near post from a corner, and Norman Hunter ended the tie, latching expertly onto a cutback to bring the World Cup winners to their first ever Euros with a 3-1 aggregate triumph. This final tie also seemed like it could be anyone's game. Yugoslavia and France had met at Euro 1960 in a spectacular 5-4 matchup in the semi-finals, which ultimately went the way of the Yugoslavians. But who would prevail this time? The first leg at Marseille didn't offer many clues. Musamec's header was cancelled out by this stylish lob from Fleury de Nallo, all still to play for at Belgrade. But unfortunately for the French, this would be where the wheels would fall off, something that could have been predicted given their very unconvincing topping of the qualifying group. In the 3rd minute, Petkovic bundled home at the near post, then another headed goal from Musamec made it 2. France were dispossessed straight from the kickoff and had their right hand side opened up, allowing Jazic to curl in a third. France went 4-0 down at the break. Petkovic single-handedly walked through the French defence, evading this shocking scissor tackle in the process of scoring a brilliant solo goal. France made things slightly more respectable before Musamec rubbed salt in the wound with a simple finish, 5-1 to Yugoslavia, 6-2 on aggregate, and they were emphatically through to the next round as France went out once again at the hands of the Yugoslavians. The top scorers of the qualification process were Gigi Riva of Italy and János Farkas of Hungary, tied on 6 goals each. We now had our 4 finalists. The host Italy would go into the competition alongside the Soviet Union, England and Yugoslavia. These 4-man competitions really do just distill the competition. There's no sort of easing into things with this 4-man tournament, but you're straight into the action, and if you don't perform on the week, you're out of there, you know. It's refreshing in a way, but it does make it feel a bit strange for a big tournament. The first semi-final featured the hosts facing off against the much feared Soviet Union. Italy again opted to play in the cauldron of the San Paolo in Naples, as opposed to the Olimpico in Rome, and a fearsome atmosphere greeted the sides. The USSR were regarded as favourites for the game, despite fielding a slightly weakened side. Igor Chislenko and Murtaz Kurtsilava were both missing through injury. Italy had been beaten by the USSR in the 2 most recent major tournaments, both at the 1966 World Cup and during the round of 16 qualifying stage of the 1964 Euros. Italy manager Ferruccio Valcareggi went for a more modern tactical setup, opting for a 4-3-3 formation with a focus on strong defending. Qualification top scorer Gigi Riva was dropped amidst hot competition, and as they got underway, Italy were struck by an early injury to their star midfielder Gianni Rivera, and, with no provisions for substitutions in play, were essentially down to 10 men. This in turn cemented the defensive approach of the Italians. The terrible weather added to the feeling that this game would turn into a slog. Dino Zoff had a brilliant match in between the sticks for the Italians, making 3 pivotal saves which would keep them in the match. Italy's Catenaccio system was working even with the reduction to 10 men, and with the score still at 0-0, the game went to extra time in an attempt to determine the victor. In a further blow to the Italians, Giancarlo Bercellino also suffered an injury and Italy were down to 9. Despite this, they remarkably almost scored in the dying embers of extra time when they hit the upright. However, after 120 minutes, it remained deadlock in spite of the Italians being down to just 9 men on the pitch by the very end. We're used to seeing the convention nowadays of a penalty shootout at this point, but in 1968 this was not formally in place, having only been trialled in certain matches up to this point. So, what now? Perhaps a replay? This would be the usual convention, but given the limited time frame of the tournament, this too was deemed unsuitable. So instead, it went to a coin toss. Perhaps the most ill-fitting conclusion to an international semi-final that you could conceive. And even more bizarrely, the coin toss did not take place out on the pitch. The two captains and the match officials ran down the tunnel to determine the result of this match behind closed doors. Giacinto Facchetti and Albert Shesternov stood side by side with the West German referee, and he asked the Italian to call the toss. He called tails, and the French franc coin, which was used to determine the result, was tossed into the air. Outside, the crowd and the rest of the teams awaited with bated breath. After a few minutes that felt like a few decades, Facchetti fatefully emerged from the tunnel. After a moment's breath, he broke out into celebration in front of the home crowd, signalling that his call was correct and he had indeed won the toss. The way it's told, it sounds a bit like that moment in the X Factor when they have to pretend they're not going through and then they tell them all it's a ruse. I'm just imagining coming out the tunnel, pretending to look sad that he's lost the coin toss, and then going into mad, rapturous celebrations. Italy were through to the final of the Euros, quite literally on a coin toss. Perhaps the next time you hear someone complaining about a loss via a penalty shootout, you can at least be grateful that matters were decided on some kind of footballing terms, and not in this cruel way. The second semi-final took place later that evening, this time at the Stadio Comunale in Florence, the home of Fiorentina, and it was Yugoslavia up against the reigning world champions of England. It was another thoroughly defensive and cagey affair, but it was to be Alf Ramsey's men who capitulated in the dying throes of the match. A Yugoslavian cross was zipped into the area from the left. It looked beyond the striker in the middle, but he produced a masterful piece of control to cushion the ball down with his chest, getting himself between the highly rated Bobby Moore and goalkeeper Gordon Banks, and duly slotting home. England then lost their heads entirely in the last minute and suffered the infamy of being the first side to incur a sending off in European Championship history. Midfielder Alan Mullery could have no complaints as he aimed a kick square at a Yugoslavian player with 1 minute to go and was given his marching orders. You had to do a lot to get a red card in those days. Yugoslavia were clear of the English and into their second ever European Championship final. Would it be second time lucky for the Balkan men? Fans packed into the Stadio Olimpico for a double header on the 8th of June 1968. First things first, there was a matter of the third place playoff between England and the Soviet Union. It was England who were to run out winners on this occasion against a demoralised USSR. Still feeling a little bit aggrieved to have lost in the manner they did, Bobby Charlton got the first on the cusp of half-time from a well-placed knockdown. Jeff Hurst added a second with about half an hour left on the clock after rounding the Soviet goalkeeper and finishing from a tight angle. A small consolation prize for the English and a good warm-up fixture for the fans who had packed into the Olimpico for the final. Match referee Gottfried Denst led the two teams out onto the pitch in Rome. This was his second major final in a row. The fans, all 68,000 of them, were filled with anticipation for another home success in the European Championship final. The Italian manager opted for a kind of 5-3-2 formation with advanced fullbacks and very deep sitting centre-backs. Yugoslavia opted for a 4-3-3 in response. Italy started at a very strong tempo, and the Yugoslavian keeper, Pantelic, was subject to a few nervy moments in the opening exchanges, nearly fumbling a long shot from Farini and dropping a cross into the area that nearly resulted in a goal. And in the 39th minute, against the run of play so far, Yugoslavia took the lead. A trickling cross went across the face of goal and found its way to Dragan Dzazic. He again showed some excellent control before putting the ball just beyond Dinozov and into the back of the net. Yugoslavia kept the pressure on in the second half. Zajic nearly cemented himself into footballing history with the second goal, but was denied by Dinozov. Then, Musemic missed a golden chance in front of goal. It still looked like they'd hold out until the 80th minute, when Italy were awarded a free kick on the edge of the box, and it was gloriously drilled under the wall by Domenghini, levelling the scores and bringing the game to extra time. Extra time was the typical lethargic display which we're used to in the modern game, and brought very little of note. 1-1 after 120 minutes, and no coin toss this time. Instead, given the gravity of the fixture as an outright final, it would instead go to a replay. They'd have to do it again at the same venue just a few days later. That date was the 10th of June. The two would be back out to do it all over again. A different match referee in the middle this time, and unfortunately a reduced attendance due to it being a weekday, with many of the ticket holders being unable to make it due to working obligations. Still, 33,000 were there in the Olimpico. The Yugoslavs were much unchanged, other than the introduction of Idris Hozic into the front line. Valcareggi, on the other hand, made sweeping changes to his personnel. Mazzola and Gigi Riva were both introduced back into the setup, carrying on the volatile chopping and changing that the Italian team had grown used to amid much competition. Gigi Riva's reintroduction paid off immediately in the early exchanges. He forced a save from Pantelic, and moments later, an errant shot from Domenghini wandered into his path in the area, and he picked his spot brilliantly with his finish. 1-0 to Italy. There were some shouts of offside perhaps, but it looked rather marginal, and of course with no VAR the goal stood. Musemic missed another brilliant opportunity in the replay for the Yugoslavians, heading just wide, and the clincher came before the first half had even come to a close, and it was an absolute beauty, one of the best goals in European final history. De Sisti played a rather simple ball through the middle that was picked up by Anastasi, and surely you could never have expected what happened next. The Italian forward flicked the ball up to himself and produced this sensational volley across the goalkeeper and into the net from the edge of the area. A magnificent goal from the then Varese player, and one that may have single-handedly clinched him a world record transfer to Juventus immediately after the tournament. Yugoslavian heads immediately dropped after falling victim to this genius, and Italy continued to knock on the door throughout the second half. Gigi Riva continued to be an absolute menace up front, heading wide from close range and having a good chance fly just over the bar. Italy thought they'd made it 3, but the strike was deemed to be offside. However, Yugoslavia were not posing any threat towards the Italian goal, and they stumbled to a defeat in the finals. It could have been so different for them, with many chances to seal the deal in the first match, but it was just not meant to be for the Yugoslavians once again. It was another home triumph, this time for the Italians, capping off a remarkable tournament phase with coin flips, extra time, replays, and finally a win. We finally had an outright winner for the Golden Boot, as Dragan Zajic ended up the top scorer with an absolute monster tally of 2 goals. The team of the tournament featured 5 Italians, 3 Yugoslavians, 2 Englishmen, and a single honorary Soviet. So that caps off a pretty remarkable Euro 1968 tournament, the first under the European Championship title. Plenty to be picked at here, as Italy ultimately took the crown. Yugoslavia finished runners-up, England 3rd, and the USSR in 4th place. You can just about see the game starting to modernise here in this tournament tactically, with much less of the free-scoring craziness of old, and defensive cohesion prioritised a lot more. No more 2 defenders, 5-striker formations. Instead, we're with pragmatic defensive Italian displays of 5 at the back. There were, however, still plenty of novel antiquities, namely the coin toss in the semi-final and of course the grand final going to a replay. All things that were about to be phased out of the international game in the coming years. So enjoy them while you still have the chance on these recaps, as soon we'll be into the boring modern format of extra time and penalties. And when have they ever produced anything interesting, let's be honest? Trash. Give me endless replays any day of the week. Football truly was starting to change as we tumbled headfirst into the 1970s. Join us next time for a comprehensive look at Euro 1972.